The village of Nsum lay nestled between the rolling green hills and ancient whispering trees of the eastern plains, a place where the air smelled of tilled earth and the river always sang in the distance. Life in Nsum moved slowly, like the steady rhythm of a craftsman's hammer, and no one embodied that rhythm more than Jaji the blacksmith. His forge, tucked near the village's center, glowed from sunrise to dusk, casting warm amber light across the dusty path where villagers came to seek him. Jaji was not only a man of steel and fire, but a man of kindness and unshakable principle. A widower for more than 10 years, he lived solely for his daughter, Elira, the light of his fading years. Elira, delicate in frame but fierce in spirit, often sat near the forge, her skirts dusted with ash, watching her father mold iron into beauty. The villagers whispered about how Jaji's hands seemed to listen to the metal, how his tools never cracked, and how his belt, an ancient strip of blackened leather with glowing symbols stitched into it, was more than just a tool of discipline. It was a mystery. Some claimed the belt was passed down from a warrior ancestor. Others believed it had been forged by the gods in a time before names. But none doubted that the belt pulsed with a strange presence. Jaji wore the belt every day, but no one ever saw him use it in anger. He kept it close like a second skin, even while sleeping. It was a part of him, and Elira knew better than anyone that it wasn't the leather he valued, it was the spirit within. He told her once, when she was barely old enough to understand, "This belt remembers. It holds pain, yes, but also honor. It is not to be worn in cruelty." She never questioned him. But the seasons turned, and the weight of life began to press on Jaji's broad shoulders. One day, while he was sharpening a ceremonial blade for the village chief's eldest son, he paused. A long moment passed. He held the blade before him, staring as if it had whispered a secret. Then he collapsed. Elira screamed. The village healer was called, but Jaji was already fading, sweat beading on his brow though the forge was cold that morning. The healer found no wound, no fever, no cause. Jaji's breaths grew shallow, his voice a whisper pulled from his core. Elira knelt beside him, clutching his hand. He looked at her with clouded eyes that still burned with urgency. "Elira," he rasped, "you must listen. The belt, it must stay with me. In the earth. No matter what happens, do not let it leave my grave. Promise me." Tears streaked her face as she nodded, unable to speak. He smiled, faint and soft, and the flame in his eyes finally dimmed. Jaji, the heart of Nsum, was gone. The villagers mourned in silence. The forge was shut. The river's song seemed quieter. Jaji's body was laid to rest on the northern hill, wrapped in woven silk and prayers. At Elira's insistence, the enchanted belt was fastened around his waist beneath the funeral cloth. No one dared argue. The legend of the belt, and the fear of disturbing it, silenced even the greedy. But no silence lasts forever. In the days that followed, the warmth of grief gave way to the chill of uncertainty. Elira's world, already fractured, began to crack at the edges. Jaji's household had always been a place of love, though it included more than just him and his daughter. Mafo, Jaji's second wife, had long lived in the same home, along with her 2 sons from a previous marriage, Bako, broad and arrogant, and Denga, sly and cold-eyed. While Jaji was alive, Mafo cloaked her true nature under feigned smiles and folded hands. But the moment the final prayer was spoken over his grave, that mask shattered. Her eyes, once soft with pretense, hardened like river stones. She began speaking in orders instead of requests, her voice a whip of sharp syllables. Elira, who had always been treated like a daughter, though never fully embraced, was now spoken of as a burden. "Your father spoiled you," Mafo sneered one evening as she scraped millet into a single wooden bowl for Elira. "But don't think the rest of us owe you the same luxury." Elira took the bowl without protest. She understood, even then, that love had been buried with her father. She slept on a mat by the hearth while Bako and Denga took her room. She woke before dawn to fetch water, sweep the yard, and prepare meals she was barely allowed to taste. She scrubbed the soot from the forge's walls though it had gone cold. And when she lingered too long, touching the tools her father once held, Mafo's voice would cut through the silence like a lash. Your hands are too soft for iron. Clean, don't pretend. At first, the villagers noticed. A few came to the compound with offerings of condolence, leaving fruits or rice at the gate. One old woman asked Mafo gently, "Will you let Alira stay with my daughter for a while?" She left with a bleeding lip and no answer. Slowly, the visit stopped. Mafo's sons, once held in check by Jaji's presence, now strutted like roosters in an empty yard. Bako took to throwing stones at chickens and snapping branches off young trees. Danga watched Alira with something colder than malice, something that measured her with quiet intent. One evening, Bako tripped over a broken stool and blamed Alira. Mafo didn't ask questions. She slapped the girl hard across the face and muttered, "That's the first. There will be more." Alira said nothing. She cried alone, where no one could hear her. She wrapped herself in memories instead of cloth. In the smell of iron and oil. In the quiet strength of her father's silence. She often found herself staring toward the hill where he was buried, her chest aching. She remembered his final breath, his final plea. "Do not let the belt leave my grave." It was more than a wish. It was a warning. And in the stillness of the night, when the wind rustled the trees and the moon carved shadows across the land, Alira sometimes thought she heard something faint and far away, like the distant clinking of metal, or a forge reigniting deep underground. As if something buried with Jaji had begun to stir. Mafo sat on the edge of her husband's bed, now her bed, staring at the empty gourd that once overflowed with Jaji's savings. Her fingers, callous but trembling, clawed through the silk lining as if more coins might be hiding beneath the weave. There was nothing. She had spent it all. The food, the fabric, the brief flirtation with riches, all gone in a matter of weeks. Greed was a fire, and it had devoured everything. Her sons, Bako and Denga, lazed outside in the shade of the baobab tree, flicking seeds at chickens and mocking villagers who passed by. They didn't understand the weight that now pressed on Mafo's shoulders like a stone. She had thought her husband's death would bring freedom. Instead, it had brought hunger. And now, there was nothing left to sell. Except one thing. The memory crept into her mind like a snake, Jaji's belt. She remembered how tightly he clutched it, how he refused to let it go even in death. The villagers had whispered about its power, its enchantments, its legacy. She had dismissed it then. Now, she clung to the idea like a drowning woman to driftwood. That night, under the cover of darkness, Mafo met with a trader who had once bought Jaji's ornamental daggers. He was not from some, but he had the air of someone who knew the value of things others feared. "The belt," she whispered, "buried with him. You know of it?" The trader's eyes glimmered. "The binding belt of Jaji the forger. It's not just a relic. It's a prison." Mafo frowned. "A prison? Binding spells don't protect," he said. "They contain. You dig it up, you own what's inside. That belt isn't just worth coin, it's a key. There are people who would kill to have it." "How much?" He named a number that made Mafo's mouth dry. It was more than Jaji ever left behind. "But beware," the trader added, as his smile faded. "If you pull out the lock, you might wake what it was keeping down." She ignored his warning. The next morning, as the rooster crowed and the sky turned pale gold, Alira awoke to the sound of shovels scraping earth. She rushed outside and saw Mafo, Bako, and Denga climbing the northern hill with picks and tools. Panic surged through her. "No," she shouted, running after them. "You can't." He said the belt must stay. "You can't open the grave." Mafo turned, her face a hard, sunburnt mask. "Shut your mouth. You're not the mistress of this house. You don't understand." Alira cried. "It's not just a belt. He warned me." Denga grabbed her roughly by the arms while Bako laughed. "Maybe he didn't want you to have it, little princess." They dragged her behind them as they reached the gravesite. The stone marker had already been pried up. Mafo knelt beside the mound and began digging furiously, muttering under her breath, sweat flying from her brow. Bako and Denga joined her, soil darkening their fingers. Alira screamed, begged, clawed at Denga's grip, but he held her still. When the first corner of the burial cloth appeared, the wind shifted. A sudden gust swept across the hill, so sharp it burned their skin. The sky, which had been a clean blue, dimmed slightly, as though a shadow had passed over the sun. The ground trembled, not enough to knock anyone over, but enough to be felt in the bones. Still, they dug. The cloth was peeled back, revealing Jaji's still body, arms folded across his chest. But it was the belt they wanted. Mafo's hands trembled as she reached for it. The leather looked untouched by time. The runes along its length pulsed faintly, like a sleeping heartbeat. Alira collapsed in the dirt. "Don't, please, don't take it." But Mafo's hands clutched the belt and pulled. The moment it left Jaji's body, the wind howled. A scream, high and hollow, swept through the trees, though no mouth made it. The leaves on the hill's trees withered instantly. The air turned sharp, the scent of forged smoke wafting through a place where no fire burned. They paused only a moment. Then Bako wrapped the belt in a cloth, and they all trudged back home, laughing at Alira who limped behind them, her sobs ignored. That night, Mafo examined the belt with greed-glazed eyes, unwrapping it carefully. The leather shimmered strangely in the firelight, almost breathing. The runes flickered. As she held it, the shadows on the walls twisted. Faces seemed to form for half a second, angry, weeping, screaming, but vanished when looked at directly. "It's just a belt," Mafo muttered, though her voice shook. Bako leaned close, touching it. "Feels warm." Denga said nothing. His eyes never left it. Alira sat silently in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. She could feel something had changed in the air. Like a door had opened somewhere deep below their feet. Like someone was watching. The next morning, Mafo came into the kitchen holding the belt. "If it's so special," she sneered, "let's see if it can scrub a floor." She tossed the belt at Alira's feet. "Wear it. And keep it on until this place sparkles." Alira hesitated. He said. "I don't care what your dead father said," Mafo barked. "Put it on." Tears welled in Alira's eyes as she picked it up. It was unnaturally warm, almost pulsing. She wrapped it around her waist with shaking hands. The moment it fastened, the fire in the hearth flared. The wooden walls groaned. No one else noticed. Bako snorted. "Looks good on you, sister of ashes." Denga just stared. "She shouldn't be wearing that." "Shut up," Mafo snapped. Alira bent to begin her chores, feeling the belt tighten with each step. It didn't pinch her skin, it gripped her soul. The house, once merely cold and cruel, began to change. At first, it was small. The windows fogged though the day was dry. The fire hissed as if drowned in whispers. A mirror cracked without cause. Bako burned his tongue on cold stew. Denga tripped and swore the floor moved. Mafo found scratches on her arms after sleep. They blamed coincidence. But Alira knew. The belt had not come alone. It had brought something with it. Or perhaps, someone. That night, as she lay awake on her thin mat, the belt still hugging her waist, she heard footsteps on the roof. Heavy. Familiar. The kind of steps that had once echoed in a forge. Her father was listening. The morning air was thick with dust as Alira carried a basket of wash water across the compound, her thin frame trembling under the weight. Her hands were raw from scrubbing, and her arms bore faint bruises that had yet to fade. The belt clung to her waist like a parasite, warm and pulsing as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Every movement she made felt like a negotiation with something unseen. Inside the house, Mafo sat grinding dried maize while barking orders, her voice sharp and relentless. "If that floor isn't shining by the time I rise, I'll have Bako make you lick it clean." Bako, who had just returned from trading meat at the market, threw his satchel to the ground and scowled when he saw a small tear in his trousers. "She didn't wash these right," he muttered, his voice dark with irritation. Stupid girl can't even scrub cloth. He stormed toward Alira, grabbing the fabric of his pants and waving it in front of her face. What is this, filth? Are you blind now? Alira shrank back, holding the basket tightly. I did wash them, Bako. The tear must have already been there. That only infuriated him further. So now you call me a liar? He ripped the basket from her hands, spilling water across the ground. His eyes glinted with fury, and he reached toward her waist, unfastening the belt that had become a symbol of her submission. Mafo looked up briefly from the mortar but said nothing, watching with narrowed eyes as her son pulled the belt free from Alira's waist. Let's see if this magical belt can teach you obedience, he growled. Alira cried out, stumbling backward, but there was no escape. The belt sliced through the air with a sound too sharp, too unnatural, like metal tearing through silk. It struck her once across the back. A second time across the shoulder. The belt felt like it moved on its own, as if guiding Bako's hand. The third strike stopped him cold. Alira did not bleed. She fell to her knees, eyes squeezed shut, breath ragged, but there were no red lines, no welts. Instead, dark bruises rose on her skin in curling, unfamiliar shapes, runes like those carved into ancient village stones. Symbols that had no place in the flesh. Bako stared at them, heart thudding, chest heaving. A strange coldness prickled down his spine. Alira's sobs were silent now, but her back glowed faintly with the outline of the belt's path. He dropped the belt. That night, Bako tossed in his sleep. Sweat poured from his forehead, and his face twisted with terror. In his dream, he stood inside a forge, but it was no ordinary one. The fire was alive, roaring like a beast, casting long shadows on the walls. Shapes moved within it, faces, eyes, mouths screaming without sound. And then he saw Jaji. The old blacksmith stood at the heart of the flames, unburnt, his face solemn but wrathful. His hammer glowed white-hot, and every strike echoed like thunder. You are my name and raise your hand against my blood, Jaji said. The blood you draw is your own. Bako woke with a scream. He sat bolt upright, clutching his chest. His heart pounded so fiercely it felt like it might burst. The room was quiet, but only at first. As the silence deepened, he began to hear them. Whispers. Soft, like ash falling. But urgent. Surrounding him. They spoke in tongues he didn't understand. Ancient voices filled the space beneath his bed, the corners of the room, the hollow air just above his ear. He plugged his ears, but they only grew louder. He lit a candle, but the flame danced in panic, casting more shadows than light. He didn't sleep again that night. Alira, meanwhile, lay awake on her mat, but she felt something different. Though her body ached, there was a strange sense of calm beneath the pain. Her father's forge had smelled of coal and sweat and burning steel. Now, the scent drifted faintly into her nose again, though there was no fire nearby. The belt, lying on the ground outside her door, pulsed faintly, but the air around her was cool, like a winter wind had curled up beside her. She whispered into the dark, Baba, are you here? A soft wind moved her braids, though the door was closed. And for the first time in weeks, she smiled faintly. Outside, the village stirred uneasily. Over the past few days, people had begun to talk. Children claimed they heard footsteps by the northern graves after dark. A shepherd said he saw the forge's old chimney emit smoke even though it hadn't been lit since Jaji died. And then there were the sounds, low clanks, like metal striking metal. Ghostly. Hollow. Wrong. One of the elders, old woman Noma, gathered the women near the well and whispered, his grave does not sleep peacefully. Someone has disturbed it. But when Mafo caught wind of these murmurs, she stormed into the square, flanked by her sons. Her voice cracked like thunder. Anyone who spreads these lies will answer to me. That grave belongs to my husband. There is no curse. The villagers fell silent, but fear lingered in their eyes. They knew Jaji was no ordinary man. They knew some things should be left buried. Back at the house, Mafo saw the belt lying in the dust. She kicked it toward Elira with a curled lip. Put it back on. Or do you want another lesson? Elira picked up the belt slowly. As her fingers touched it, the chill returned, cold, but safe. Like a presence pressing gently against her skin. She fastened it without complaint. And as she stood, her bruises still glowing with runes, her eyes shimmered with a quiet strength. Jaji had heard the first whip. And he was watching. The days grew hotter, heavier, and stranger in the village of Nsum. Elira limped through her chores with a quiet endurance that unsettled even the chickens in the yard. The belt clung to her waist like molten iron, its leather too dark now, almost blackened, as though it had been scorched in a fire. Yet she dared not take it off. It had become both her prison and her shield. Mafo barked orders with increasing bitterness, irritated by how slowly Elira moved. She's dragging like a cursed goat, she snapped one morning, slamming a wooden pestle into a bowl of okra. Danga, never one to turn down a chance at cruelty, sneered. Maybe the belt's too heavy for her twig legs. Or maybe it needs to be reminded who owns it. Elira's fingers trembled as she stirred the pot over the outdoor fire pit, but she said nothing. Her silence only fueled Danga's appetite for dominance. Stand up, he said coldly. She hesitated. I said, stand. The air stilled. The flames in the pit crackled louder. As Elira rose, he lunged forward, snatching the belt from her waist and wrapping it tightly around his hand. In one swift motion, he struck her across the thigh. The belt hissed, yes, hissed, like a snake. Elira cried out and fell to the ground, gripping her leg. Danga raised the belt again, but this time, it writhed in his hand. He froze. What the, he muttered, staring at the leather, which now pulsed with a faint red glow. He dropped it instantly, shaking his fingers as though burned. That night, the fire pit flared higher than usual. Danga, returning from a moonlit errand to the goat shed, passed too close to the flames, and that's when it happened. Invisible hands, cold, firm, relentless, seized him by the ankle and yanked. He screamed as his legs skidded across the gravel, pulling him toward the pit's edge. He clawed at the ground, screaming, Ma! Mafo, as the flames leapt like they were alive. Only when he cried out, forgive me. Please, did the grip loosen. He scrambled backward, panting, his clothes scorched, his eyes wide with terror. He didn't speak a word about it to Mafo, but she saw the burns on his ankles the next morning. When she asked what happened, Danga only muttered something about slipping on a stone. The belt, however, was not silent. It had grown heavier. Mafo picked it up to inspect it and nearly dropped it from the unexpected weight. It felt like it had absorbed iron and rage. She sniffed it and frowned, it reeked of smoke. Just bad luck, she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. That night, Elira lay curled beneath a threadbare cloth, her legs aching, her back throbbing. Her eyelids fluttered as sleep claimed her, and the dream took her swiftly. In it, she stood before the forge again. But this time, the fire blazed brighter, and her father stood closer. His face was no longer peaceful, it was fierce, like molten steel mid-hammer. His voice, when it came, rumbled through the dreamscape. Your pain fuels me. Elira's lips trembled. Baba? He nodded once. Each lash strikes not just your flesh but awakens what they buried with me. But why? She asked, tears welling. Because they broke the sacred trust. The belt was bound to protect. It was buried to rest. Now it has risen to punish. She reached out toward him, but the dream dissolved, fading into whispers. Whispers that didn't stop. Even after she woke, she could still hear them. At first faint, like wind under the door, but soon clearer, sharper, more purposeful. The belt, lying at the foot of her mat, pulsed faintly and whispered. Betrayer. Mafo lied, sold your inheritance. Elira sat upright, breath-catching. What do you mean? The whispering grew louder in her ear, like a mouth pressed against her skin. She clutched the belt. She was never poor. She hid Jaji's coins beneath the floor. Lied to the villagers. Lied to you. Alira's heart pounded. She had never questioned Mafo's claim of poverty. She had accepted her role, her pain. But now, the truth trickled like poison into her heart. Meanwhile, the haunting spread beyond whispers. Mafo's days became riddled with misfortunes. Her loom snapped mid-weaving. Her clay pots cracked without cause. Her stored maize turned to dust. And then the chickens began dying, one by one, feathers scattered in perfect circles around their cold bodies. "The devil is at work," Mafo whispered, burying the fifth hen in silence. The villagers began to notice. People cast sidelong glances when Mafo walked by. They murmured about the string of bad omens. Old woman Noma whispered to a neighbor, "It is Jaji. I feel it in my bones." Alira noticed, too. The more she suffered, the more their luck soured. She began to understand, this wasn't punishment. It was protection. Her father's ghost didn't rest because she didn't rest. Her bruises weren't just marks. They were messages. Warnings. Triggers. Late one night, she stood alone in the courtyard, belt in hand. "Baba," she whispered, "what do you want me to do?" The wind rustled the trees. A hush fell over the land. Then, from the shadows of the forge, a figure emerged, only a silhouette, glowing faintly with embers. It raised one finger and pointed at Mafo's hut. Then vanished. Alira understood. Vengeance was no longer distant. It was watching. The village had always been a place of simple rhythms, dawn rising over red earth, children's laughter, the steady clanging of Jaji's forge that had long since gone cold. But now, whispers filled the air like smoke from a smoldering fire, thick and uneasy. The strange events surrounding Alira and the cursed belt had begun to unravel the fabric of peace in some. One afternoon, word spread that the village healer, Mama Abina, had examined Alira. She was a wise woman, with hands that had soothed many a wound and eyes that saw beyond flesh. When she looked at Alira's back, she gasped softly. The bruises, glowing faintly in the dim light of her hut, were unlike anything she had seen before, symbols carved by something unnatural. "These marks," Mama Abina murmured, running her fingers gently over the darkened patterns, "they speak of curses, old magic bound to the bloodline. This is no ordinary pain." She confronted Mafo privately, hoping to warn her before the situation escalated. "Your daughter suffers because of this belt. It carries your late husband's spirit, restless and angry," Mama Abina said carefully. "You must lay it to rest again. Return it to the grave." Mafo's face darkened, and her eyes narrowed like a snake ready to strike. "I will not be told what to do by an old woman full of superstition," she hissed. "Leave my house, or I will make sure you never heal anyone in this village again." Mama Abina's lips pressed thin, but she left quietly, knowing well the weight of Mafo's threats. Fear hung in the air, choking the village's breath. Yet, the villagers were not blind. Slowly, conversations stirred in hushed tones near the well, beneath the mango trees, and around the fire pits at night. "It's the spirit of Jaji," said one farmer, lowering his voice. "Since they dug up his grave, the earth has not been the same. I heard Alira cries out in the night, but no one touches her." "Like she's cursed," whispered an old woman, clutching her shawl tighter. "And the belt, remember how Bako was burned," a young man said, glancing over his shoulder as if the shadow of the belt itself might hear. Mafo, sensing the gathering storm, tried desperately to divert suspicion. "She's a witch," Mafo declared one evening in the market square, voice loud and harsh. "Her pain and the strange happenings are because she summoned evil upon us." The villagers hesitated. Fear was a powerful ally, and the idea of witchcraft was not foreign to some. But many remembered Jaji's kindness, his dedication, and how fiercely he had protected his daughter. Despite Mafo's accusations, strange events persisted, and only when the belt was worn. One full moon night, when the village lay draped in silver light, a terrible cry shattered the silence. Bako, who had been boasting to friends about his dominance over Alira, stumbled outside his hut clutching his arm. The belt had wrapped itself tightly around his forearm, unmoving, burning deep into his flesh. He screamed as the leather etched a scorching pattern onto his skin, a mark ancient and unfamiliar, yet terrifyingly clear. When the others came running, the belt suddenly slackened and fell away, leaving Bako panting and trembling. His arm bore a fiery brand, an ancestral symbol of judgment, one only Jaji's family had worn. The village fell into fearful silence. That night, dreams haunted many and some. They saw Jaji, standing tall before a roaring forge. Flames lit the dark sky as his hammer struck glowing metal, sparks flying like stars. His face was fierce, determined, a spirit bound to the earth but unwilling to rest. In the dream, he called out, his voice carrying the weight of thunder. Justice will be forged in fire. Villagers woke with sweat-drenched brows, their hearts pounding as if summoned by an ancient power. They could no longer deny the truth. Jaji's spirit was alive, restless, demanding reckoning. Mafo's attempts to silence the murmurs failed, her control slipping like smoke through fingers. And Alira, bearing the weight of her father's curse and protection, stood at the center of a storm no one could escape. The festival of purging was a solemn time in some, a day when the village gathered to cleanse itself of evil spirits and misfortune that had haunted the community. The festival was harsh, raw, and steeped in ancient customs that few dared question. This year, however, there was an ominous weight pressing down on the celebrations. The villagers sensed something dark simmering beneath the surface, though none dared say it aloud. Mafo seized the moment to assert her dominance once and for all. Standing before the gathered crowd in the village square, she lifted her voice above the murmurs. Today, Alira will be cleansed. Her spirit is stained with witchcraft and curses, and only through the sacred whipping can she be purified. A hush fell over the crowd. The air felt thick and charged, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The elders reluctantly agreed to use the ancient belt, the very one buried with Jaji, as the instrument of this ritual. It was said to carry powerful magic, a link to the ancestors, and now, the villagers thought, a tool for divine justice. Alira stood barefoot in the center of the square, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. The belt, cold and heavy, was held tightly by the village elder, who was chosen to perform the first strike. The elder raised the belt. The crowd held their breath. The first strike landed with a sharp crack. But instead of a cry from Alira, a blood-curdling scream tore through the sky, raw, fierce, and bone-chilling. Everyone froze. Mafo's eyes widened in terror. She clutched at her chest and fell backward, writhing in agony as if invisible flames had engulfed her. Her skin blistered and bubbled, but there was no fire visible, only smoke curling around her like dark spirits. The crowd gasped in horror as Mafo's body began to contort unnaturally, twisting and bending in ways no human should. She screamed and clawed at the air, her voice warped and filled with pain. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no clouds gathered above. The belt slipped from the elder's hands, twisting and writhing like a living serpent. It slithered swiftly across the ground and wrapped itself tightly around Alira's waist. Alira gasped, feeling the leather tighten as if it were alive, breathing with a fierce energy. The sky darkened as a shadowy figure materialized above the square. It was Jaji's spirit, glowing faintly, half seen, yet overwhelming in presence. His eyes burned like molten iron. You whipped my flesh with my memory, his voice boomed across the silent crowd, now feel what I felt. The villagers staggered backward, some falling to their knees. They watched as the spirit's wrath ignited the air, crackling like wildfire. Mafo screamed one final time before collapsing into unconsciousness, her body marked by invisible burns that left her broken and trembling. Alira stood firm, the belt now part of her. She felt the surge of power and pain, the legacy of her father's spirit coursing through her veins. The festival ended in stunned silence, but the message was clear. Justice, fueled by the wrath of the past, had been delivered. And the village would never be the same. The aftermath of the festival of purging sent ripples through some like a violent storm. Fear had gripped the village, and whispers of curses and restless spirits filled every corner. The once peaceful streets were now haunted by dread, as if the very ground beneath their feet had turned against them. Danga, the youngest and most reckless of Mafo's sons, was the first to feel the crushing weight of the curse. Panic overtook him as the night descended, and he fled into the dense forest that bordered the village. His breath came in ragged gasps as shadows flickered between the trees, dark shapes that gleamed like molten metal, twisting and shifting like living nightmares. He stumbled over roots and rocks, desperate to escape, but the shadowy figures pursued relentlessly, their forms flickering between human and flame. The forest seemed alive with their wrath, and no matter how fast Danga ran, they closed the distance with terrifying ease. Suddenly, a spectral hand, cold and burning at once, shot from the earth and seized his ankle. He screamed, dragged downward into the soil as the shadows swallowed him whole. The village awoke the next morning to silence where Danga's laughter once rang. Back in the village, Bako's arrogance crumbled. Haunted by the scars branded on his arm and the unseen hands that had pulled at his soul, he fell to his knees before Alira, trembling and broken. "Please," he begged, voice thick with shame and fear. "Forgive me." Alira's eyes were steady, filled with pain but also an unexpected strength. She did not strike him back, but the air around her seemed to shimmer with a quiet power. The belt, once a symbol of suffering, now glowed softly, fused permanently to her skin, its weight no longer a burden but a shield. The leather wrapped around her waist was warm, pulsating like a heartbeat, and every whisper from it was a promise of protection and unyielding resolve. Meanwhile, Mafo's fate was cruel and relentless. The invisible burns and twisted agony of the festival had not passed, but transformed her into something unearthly. Her body vanished into a shadowy form, a wailing spirit condemned to wander the village endlessly. Children, once afraid of the dark, now shuddered at her mournful cries echoing through the night. Mothers hushed their little ones with warnings. "Behave, or Mafo's spirit will come for you." Her story became a chilling tale passed down through generations, a cautionary reminder of cruelty's price. One night, as the village slept under a blanket of stars, Alira found herself pulled into a dream, soft and yet profound. There, by a glowing forge that burned eternally, her father's spirit appeared, his eyes calm but filled with deep sorrow. "Live," he whispered, voice carrying the weight of generations, "not just for me, but for them to remember." Alira nodded, feeling the resolve settle deep within her bones. She was not merely a victim of fate or cruelty. She was the living bridge between past and future, the keeper of her father's legacy and the guardian of justice. With the belt glowing warmly against her skin, Alira rose to face the days ahead, knowing the curse that consumed others had instead become her strength, and her story was just beginning. In the wake of the curse's devastating consequences, the village of Nsum found itself slowly shifting from fear and sorrow toward hope and renewal. The air, once heavy with whispers of dark magic and restless spirits, now hummed softly with the promise of healing and new beginnings. At the center of this transformation stood Alira, the blacksmith's daughter, who had emerged from suffering tempered like the steel her father once forged. Alira began by returning to the old forge her father had left behind. The structure was worn and weathered, but beneath the layers of dust and neglect, its heart still pulsed with life. Guided by dreams filled with glowing embers and the steady rhythm of hammer on anvil, she worked tirelessly. Each strike echoed with her father's spirit, each spark a testament to the bond they still shared. The whispers from the belt, a presence both comforting and fierce, helped her shape the metal, imbuing every tool and blade with the power of memory and fire. Word spread quickly that Alira, once the village outcast and victim, had become its youngest and most skilled blacksmith. She crafted tools that were not only strong but seemed to carry the very essence of her father's wisdom and strength. Farmers sought her plows, hunters came for her arrows, and the warriors of Nsum requested blades that could cut through the darkest night. But Alira's true power was not just in her hands but in the aura that surrounded her, the glowing belt fused to her waist, now a symbol of resilience rather than pain. Though the belt no longer caused her harm, she knew it was not hers to wear freely. In honor of her father and the trials endured, the belt was carefully removed from her waist one quiet evening. It was placed high above the forge, hung as a sacred relic for all to see, a reminder of sacrifice, protection, and the indomitable spirit of Jaji, the blacksmith who never truly left. the villagers who had once turned their backs on Elira now sought her guidance and protection. Children, curious and wide-eyed, gathered around as she told stories of courage, warning them of the dangers of cruelty and the power of justice. Elders nodded in respect, and even those who had doubted her strength now bowed their heads in gratitude. Elira's heart swelled not from the newfound respect but from the knowledge that she had reclaimed her place, not as a victim, but as a guardian of her people's future. One bright morning, as the sun painted the village with golden light, new faces appeared at the edge of Nsum. A family, weary from travel but hopeful, settled near the outskirts of the village. Among them was a little girl, her eyes sparkling with curiosity and wonder. As they explored their new home, she spotted the forge standing proudly in the village center and the glowing relic hanging above it. "Who is the girl with the glowing belt?" she asked her mother, voice filled with awe. The mother smiled softly, eyes meeting Elira's from afar. "She is the blacksmith's daughter," she replied. "The one who survived the darkness and now lights the way for us all." And so, the story of Elira, the girl bound to her father's legacy, forged by pain, and tempered by love, lived on, whispered in the winds and carved into the hearts of Nsum's people for generations to come.